Hello and welcome back to our virtual edition of County Board Wrap Up. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and we're talking today with Board Chair Libby Garvey as well as Board Member Christian Dorsey about the steps the board took in May to support our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll begin with some of the board's emergency resolutions extending the stay at home for Arlingtonians. And let's get started with that. Now, the board adopted what's called a continuity of government emergency resolution. Tell me about this. Why was it necessary?
Well, we already did it once, and it's just making it legally possible for us to meet this way. Like this broadcast we're doing, we do our meetings this way. Because a lot of the times it's been so clear that the Virginia Code and the Freedom of Information Act requirement, none of them anticipated an age of technology and none of them anticipated a pandemic. And consequently, we have ways that we can really function pretty well, but we have to make these legal actions to make sure that they're actually legal to do it that way. So we have to declare that there's an emergency, and that's why we're doing it. And it's also to ensure that our democratic processes don't get lost while we're doing this. That we actually maintain the continuity of government and the ability of our residents to participate when they want to, and our ability to be transparent and get information across. So that's what that's all about, as well as to give the managers some authority to move quickly, because there were two different things we did, and nimbly. And we had a little bit of back and forth with our residents, which was good, because I think people are very concerned about how the Arlington way will continue. With the manager, in an emergency, they've got some things that he needs to do. If he had to come back to us and convene a meeting and we had to advertise it and do all this, it would take a long time. And sometimes in an emergency, you want to be able to right now allow people to do this, prevent people from doing that. So this gave him the ability to do that, but that does not mean he doesn't come back to the board. He still comes back to the board at the next meeting and presents things. So we do a fair amount of ratifying what he has already done and started doing. And that's helpful.
You mentioned the public participation angle. Now, has there been any concern that these virtual meetings may cut down on that public participation? What have you been seeing so far?
Christian, we've been seeing a fair amount.
I think there's always that abstract concern because it's different. It's different than the norm. But I think once people actually engage virtually, they realize a couple of really key things. One, you can stand up meetings much more quickly as opposed to scheduling them once every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So if you actually need to connect with people, you can establish it within the parameters of the law a little bit more quickly. So you could actually have more substantive engagement there. So in other words, even though we're in a different time and we're using different media, doesn't mean that it actually has to result in lesser quality or lesser engagement. In fact, we can enrich engagement. And I think people are starting to see the opportunities with that. And, as Libby talked about all of the ways in which this resolution would allow us to function in the emergency, I want to highlight what it's called: continuity of government, not limiting of government, not reduction of opportunities. We really passed an ordinance so that we could continue to do all of the essential things that Arlingtonians have come to expect and love, but to deal with the world as it exists now, where we're not present with each other and we can conduct business virtually and give the manager all of the flexibility to do what's required to keep safe and operational during this time of change.
But the board retains its authority, although I would say, Kara, I'm sorry I interrupted you, because there is the whole question of commissions. And I think Christian, I don't know, we probably ought to talk about that a little bit, because that is a slightly different issue that we're really still working through, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think we found a way to help our commissions. One, we've enabled them to be able to meet through actions of our ordinance and also our lobbying of the Attorney General and the Governor, whereas prior to those actions, they wouldn't be allowed to meet unless it were explicitly and expressly to deal with the emergency at hand. So we broadened flexibility to have our commissions meet, but we run up against the real world limitation of we don't have the staff resources to stand up, fully produced video conferences for each of our 50 plus commissions who meet during a typical month. So we are having to have everybody prioritize their work to marry the necessity of their meeting with the very real staff limitations that we have. So I think we're going to work that out well, Libby. I'm optimistic. What about you?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. It's just going to take a little while. We had a great presentation at our meeting, and staff had done, and she was talking about how she'd had this wonderful Zoom phone call with her grandfather, you know, and we all think it's so easy. Why can't we do that? And they pointed, well, if you're having a great, you know, brunch with your parents or your family, you still don't invite the entire of Arlington County, which is what you have to do legally. Nor do you keep minutes of it, which is what you have to do legally. I mean, they're all of the, nor do you have to make sure anybody can access it, whether they have a hearing impairment or visual impairment or physical impairment. So it's very different. And we're all learning. I'm very optimistic. I think it's going to be better in the end. I really do, because I think in a way these meetings, this style of meeting does allow some people to participate who otherwise it would be a lot harder for.
Well, that actually brings me to my next question. When this is all over and we go back to normal, so to speak, we will obviously go back to having meetings in person, but do you think there will still be some kind of virtual element to do exactly what you said, to have the participation from individuals who just would never have done so before?
I sure hope so. You know, one of the things our staff has looked at is when we review site plan applications. We've typically had our engagement take the form of people who show up at our very public site plan review committee meetings, which are absolutely essential meetings for people who dig deep into a land use application. But let's think about the broader community of people who would be interested and maybe have opinions about that land use application, who just don't have the wherewithal to commit to studying it and being in a deliberative process over the course of many weeks or months, but who nonetheless might have feedback that's important to consider and that would be valuable. And if we think about putting these concept plans up virtually and allowing people to walk through and understand projects using internet technology, and then to be able to provide comment or to make choices and display priorities, that would be all great. And I hope that that's something that sticks regardless of whether or not we are under restrictions or not, because it's a great way to expand engagement.
I think so. And I've been noticing some of our civic groups, like Committee of 100, it's been meeting for maybe almost 100 years now, 80 at least, at Marymount University. It's great to have a dinner and a speaker, and it's on a Wednesday night. And they've had a Zoom meeting here that I participated in there, and they had a lot. That was the largest meeting they'd had in ages.
Wow.
Because not everyone can on a Wednesday night pick up and go to someplace. And I've seen that happen in a variety of groups, civic associations, some other organizations and institutions that have been around a long time. And they're still, in many ways, modeled on the 20th century approach to the Arlington way. And here we are moving into the 21st century, and suddenly they're getting more people participating, particularly those who might have children at home, so they could participate in a meeting like this, but couldn't leave the kids at home alone, right? I mean, I just think the flexibility it's adding, I do, when I'm mostly positive, think we're going to end up actually in a much better place. It's a painful way to get there. But
yes. So maybe a kind of a combo of both worlds down the line.
Absolutely.
That really lets us think a little more innovatively.
Yeah. So. But you're still going to want to meet. I mean, I think we all want to get together in the same room and, toast each other or whatever it is
most
we do.
Most of us are eagerly awaiting that day.